There is this sense of if something goes wrong, then the immigrants must be to blame. The foreigners must be to blame.
Because there is such a fear that, if a foreigner is blamed or is seen to be responsible for something, it could lead to rioting.
And all it takes is that spark of ignition.
The rape of young women is absolutely unacceptable, no matter who does it or in what community. And you also have to say that is racist. And attacking migrants in their own homes is just pure and simple, odious racism.
I have a water, see if I have to hurry, but what I do with I'm going to pizza.
Dirty foreign bag.
You could hear the laughter, you could hear the swearing, you could hear the almost joy that there was last night as a group of protesters set upon the Larne Leisure Centre, where immigrant families from Ballymena had been rehoused for their own safety. It turned out not to be that safe after all.
The third night of unrest and rioting in Northern Ireland. Gangs wearing balaclavas shouting, "Where are the foreigners?" And today we're going to try and ask a question. Is this more of what we saw in the Southport rioting last summer, or is this particular to Northern Irish identity? Welcome to the Newsagents.
It's John.
It's Emily.
It's Lewis.
This is the third straight night of masked youths pelting police with petrol bombs, fireworks, rocks. We've seen clashes in Ballymena, and the violence looks as if it's now spreading to other towns in Northern Ireland. There have been clashes with the Police Service of Northern Ireland, the PSNI. They have fired rounds of batons, water cannon. They are trying to disperse the troublemakers around County Antrim, which is a heavily Protestant area. And these clashes have not come out of nowhere. There is a story behind what may or may not have triggered them. There is a subtext, at least, for what has brought people onto the streets in the last few nights.
Yeah, the violence broke out, I think it was Monday night, after protesters rallied. Initially, they rallied peacefully, but it happened basically because in the aftermath of an alleged sexual assault against a teenage girl at the weekend, 2 teenagers, 1 man, were then arrested for that alleged sexual assault of a local girl in Ballymena. The second such incident blamed on migrants in just a few weeks. So on Monday, the 2 boys, who spoke through a Romanian interpreter, appeared in court charged with attempted rape. And you saw, as a result of that, these protests, as I say, initially peaceful, then violent. And of course, this is taking place in the context of Ballymena, which is a strongly loyalist town, unionist town, once prosperous, now quite a bit of unemployment, deprivation, and also a very strong immigrant presence, particularly in the old working class areas of the town. So this is, in some ways, there are specific things about this in Northern Ireland which we can talk about, but it reminds you of similar incidents which have taken place across the country in similar sorts of places where there is just this spark, this ignition, usually around sexual assault, allegedly by an immigrant. And basically, it just ignites very quickly.
Yeah, and that's the bit that's looked very familiar to what we saw last year in Southport. But it also looked, at the pictures from the TV last night, very much Northern Ireland. The rows of PSNI Land Rovers, the metal grills down on the windscreens to protect those inside, the petrol bombs being kind of prepared and thrown and lobbed at the police lines. It looked like a kind of a throwback to the Troubles, to the marching season, hot summer nights where there would be clashes between those who wanted to, kind of the flute bands who wanted to whistle down the street, and then the Republican protesters who wanted to stop them coming anywhere near their communities.
You're talking about the clash of Protestant and Catholic communities in Northern Ireland. The marching season it kicks off on July the 12th. And this is in the lead up to this. They build these big bonfires. They often stand, sort of protect them. The young guys stay out at night. They're sort of protecting the bonfires. And it tends to be that combination of sort of hot summer nights, very light, late nights that ferments a kind of unrest, essentially.
And I did a lot of reporting from Northern Ireland at the time of the 1980s, after the signing of the the Anglo-Irish agreement between Garret Fitzgerald and Thatcher when she was the Prime Minister, and the view of the Protestant community was Ulster says no. That was the kind of, everywhere you went, Ulster says no. What struck me then was, and being caught in the middle of rioting, sort of like what you've seen over the past 3 nights, was that the rioters there was control. There was command and control, whether it be on the Protestant side, whether it be the paramilitaries on the Protestant side, the UVA, the UFF, or whether it be Sinn Féin on the Republican side. And, I remember being caught in the middle of one, and there were petrol bombs being thrown. We needed to get out to do our reports, and someone held up their hand, and the petrol bomb stopped, and we walked out, because they realised that the journalists had to do their job, and we were allowed to leave. It doesn't feel like that this time round. It doesn't feel like there is control. Now, that is either because loyalist paramilitaries are saying, go on and do it, get on with it, lads, or they don't have the control anymore. And listening to the police now, it sounds like they don't have control anymore. This is young people doing it of their own volition.
Yeah. So I guess that's the Northern Ireland context. But to put it back into a wider UK context, one of the questions we're asking is, are we seeing a reflection of a wider sort of populist movement? Going back to what you were saying, Lewis, which was the crime at the centre of this is about a local white girl who has, we understand, been sexually assaulted by 2 young boys, 14-year-old boys, who may or may not have been of Romanian extract. We know that the interpreter was Romanian. And there is a growing sense of what we have seen, I guess, here amongst, the sort of the whole question of the grooming gangs, of blame the foreigners. The boys, we should say, are in court and they've denied the charges. But there is this sense of, if something goes wrong, then the immigrants must be to blame. The foreigners must be to blame, even though there have been plenty of horrific cases in many towns around Northern Ireland and obviously in the rest of the UK of sexual assault on young girls.
And you can see, just on your point, Emily, about how this so quickly becomes an anti-migrant thing, generally. Nearby village, Kalabaki, car and home of a Filipino migrant who was entirely unconnected to the alleged assault, also firebombed. In Ballymena, Filipino residents then affixed Filipino and Union flags to their door to ward off attacks by locals. This is dark stuff.
Which didn't help,
stuff.
because one guy who's a Philippine migrant worker had his, car and house firebombed. So, and we should say that this constituency is Jim Allister's, who is probably the most firebrand of the populist right in Northern Ireland, and probably not 100 miles away from encouraging a certain anti-migrant or anti-foreigner sentiment amongst local people.
But, look, you've got Tommy Robinson now tweeting out all this stuff. A lot of the kind of videos that are being uploaded are coming from his account, where he's obviously been sent videos. He's uploading them. This is what he does. This is his area of operation, as it were. Foreigners are to blame. Remember, it was the other week that we were talking about the Liverpool victory parade and a car driving into the crowd, and the police saying very early on that the person who had been arrested was white, because there is such a fear that, if a foreigner is blamed or is seen to be responsible for something, it could lead to rioting. And that seems to be what has happened in Ballymena in the past few days. The interesting thing about it is that the level of migration in Northern Ireland is very, very small compared to, England and Scotland. The percentages are something like 3% of people in Northern Ireland are from immigrant backgrounds. So, and when you go to Northern Ireland...
Yeah, just to put that in context, this is Stormont figures, 3.5% of the population is from an ethnic minority. In England and Wales, that's 18%.
Yeah.
And it's 13% in Scotland. So way, way down on the UK average.
Yeah. And so... You, on the one hand, you think, well, it's not as much of a problem, and it's a kind of still a very white society, whether white Catholic or white Protestant, but Northern Ireland is still very, very white in that kind of classic sense. But I think it's also a symbol of the fact that people have not got used to, if you live in London, if you live in Manchester, you live in Birmingham, you're used to a more multicultural society, and that isn't the case in Northern Ireland, or even in the Republic, dare I say, where there's also been similar outbreaks of violence against immigrants.
Yeah, and I think that's why. I mean, I absolutely think there is obviously going to be a specific local context, and there is a specific Northern Ireland context, and there's no doubt there is obviously anywhere in Northern Ireland, particularly in a community like this, there's a muscle memory of street violence. There's a muscle memory of that kind of street action. But I also think that we've seen enough evidence now to say, to be honest, this could be anywhere. It could be anywhere in the sense that, as you say, John, we saw similar things happen in Dublin last year. We've seen similar things happen in English cities and towns in particular. And it's enough of a pattern that makes me think that, frankly, I mean, people have talked about the social contract being frayed in this case. It feels to me that in many, many places, partly, maybe not even just partly, largely as a result of the radicalisation of a lot of online spaces in particular, Twitter, X, we see Tommy Robinson's influence. A lot of these places are powder kegs. And all it requires is a spark. And usually that has become, because, this idea of racialised violence has become commonplace online. You see this in online spaces. The idea that, and it's one of the most evocative ideas historically, these immigrants, these people, they're coming after our women, white girls. They're coming after white girls. They have a predilection for white girls. And all it takes is that spark of ignition. And you basically, very, very quickly, I mean, we've done reporting on this show. I mean, sometimes it is true. Sometimes a migrant might be responsible for those things. Sometimes they're not. I've seen, we've done reporting on this show when we went to Rotherham and we saw what happened with the asylum hotels there. The far right at that time were going around house to house, handing out leaflets, Patriotic Defence League, others, handing out leaflets, shoving them through the door, just old-fashioned, just saying, these migrants with no evidence are responsible for X numbers of assaults, X numbers of rapes locally. It is tapping into a rich seam of deep, profound anxiety in many towns and cities around the UK at the moment.
Yeah, and I do think it goes back to what I'm going to call the Rupert Lowe question, which is such a simple one. I.e., do you care about all victims or just victims of Pakistani men? Because if you don't apply the same outrage to any woman or girl that's raped, only the victims of foreign-born assaulters, then you've revealed what you really care about, which is not the victims. And the point about this case, horrendous, we don't know if it's... And the point about this case, horrendous if a young woman has been assaulted. But those people are facing the law in court. And actually, there is a former DUP councillor who was jailed in 2010 for 7 years for rape. There is a former DUP councillor and TUV members convicted of child sex abuse in 2012. One of them had their case quashed in 2016. These cases did not incite riots. Why not? So it's not really about the girl. It's not really about abuse. It's not really about a sense of what the victims are going through. It is being used as a pretext. And I think you can see how disaffected certain communities are. And that is something politicians have to register. I mean, particularly in Northern Ireland, where they haven't had continual governance for years, with the Stormont deal being on and off and on and off. They feel completely sort of cut off from what's happened in the UK. They feel that they're taking orders from Westminster because they haven't got a proper sense of their own devolved government that has only recently been sort of, restarted in Northern Ireland. But I think if you are serious about trying to find solutions, you have to disassociate the same things. You can say the rape of young women is absolutely unacceptable, no matter who does it or in what community. And you also have to say that is racist, and attacking migrants in their own homes is just pure and simple odious racism.
100%. I think that I think there are elements, of course, that are very familiar after what happened in Southport, and it looks like it's. But there is also a Northern Ireland context, which is that there is a much more heightened awareness of identity politics in Northern Ireland. Are you a Protestant or a Catholic? Is the kind of
every school's been asking you that. Every neighbourhood's been asking that.
People will ask you what school you go to, and they'll know instantly whether you're Catholic or Protestant. It's part of what you do when you meet someone in Northern Ireland. You more or less instantly determine which side
from whether they say H or H.
Exactly.
Right? I mean, literally, the tiniest things, the names, everything will tell you something about your neighbour in an instant.
And so there is a heightened awareness. I don't think you can explain away what's happened in terms of those things, i.e., you can't just say, oh, well, it's a sectarian place, no wonder they've gone after whoever it happens to be. I don't think that explains it, but I think that it's more complex than just saying this is Southport transposed to Ballymena.
No, I don't think it's I think Southport is actually that relatively unusual. And I think this is more like many of the other things that we've seen over the last 12 months. I mean, I would say that if anything, the point is that we in Britain and British politics is becoming more like Northern Ireland. We have become more identitarian. We have developed a stronger racialised sense. We have developed that kind of fire and brimstone kind of politics that was commonplace with people like Ian Paisley, that you're seeing, there were particular religious elements then, but that has been transposed to become more racial, to become more heightened. Honestly, I think there are a lot of English towns you go to on these places, it would feel a lot like Ballymena in the sense of, not with the sectarian element, but in that sense of a deep, deep racial anxiety. And I think that is profoundly disturbing.
Really?
There are places in Britain, I would say, where sectarian tension, which is being fermented in different political directions, is not unlike the sort of tension that would have seen in Northern Ireland.
I mean, what's complicated about this, of course, is that the Protestants who are rioting are getting some support from Catholics who also feel that the anti-immigrant question is a bigger one than sectarian politics. Now, I don't want to overstress that, but it's very confusing. If you look, for example, I was talking to a colleague of ours in Northern Ireland who said the Sinn Féin position is very nuanced and very complicated because Sinn Féin in Northern Ireland are quite a progressive party. They want to slam this kind of behaviour. They want to say, absolutely shocking, it's racist, we're not, the party of Jim Allister, we will call this out and we will condemn it. And yet, if you go south the border in Dublin, then the whole question around the shape of migration and asylum is shaping up to be a much bigger problem for Sinn Féin. So the party is slightly split. It's slightly, ambivalent about how it responds to this.
The Republican Party, I mean, it's a Republican Party, but it believes in Irish nationalism.
Yeah.
And, it wants an Ireland for Ireland. And so you will find elements, it's like the Scottish National Party, where there are elements that are quite right-wing.
And I think there's also a vulnerability to the Protestant community who feel that because of demographics, Catholic communities in Northern Ireland are growing exponentially faster. And so that ties into a sense of your identity as well. Are we being sort of voted out of our own communities? I mean, it's important that
Lewis,
the
only thing I would just add to I keep thinking about what you've just said. If you are in Northern Ireland and you travel around Northern Ireland, you're very rarely unaware of whether you're in a Protestant area or a Catholic area. If you're in a Protestant area, the curbstones will be painted red, white and blue. There'll be Union flags fluttering everywhere. It will feel very loyalist. And if you're in a strongly Catholic area, there'll be Irish tricolours on top of buildings.
I'm obviously not transposing the historic legacy of Northern Ireland to Britain. What I'm saying is that questions around identitarian questions have been central to Northern Irish politics, obviously, certainly since the Troubles and indeed before that. And what I'm saying is that our politics in Britain, as is well documented, has moved in an identitarian
Well, it's a kind of
direction.
English nationalism now,
Indeed,
which
so
is
these
rising.
questions
Yes.
of identity have become far more central to British politics than they were 50 years ago, which was still largely anchored around class-based divisions, economic divisions. So what I'm saying is that some of those echoes are not dissimilar to the sort of thing that we would see.
But
in
I think
Northern
it still
Ireland.
is economic. I mean, I think...
There are, and there's a huge economic part of this,
if you
for
look
sure.
at
We're talking about communities
Luke
that are deeply
Schill from
deprived.
More in Common, it says, that the most blinding thing when you're trying to understand the rise of reform is people who do not think their lives are working. I mean, I know a lot of rich people also support reform, and it's kind of the bleeding obvious, isn't it? But it does go back to economics. I don't think you feel the same sense of English nationalism without feeling the pain that you think you haven't been listened to, or you've been ignored, or your wages haven't gone up, or your community has changed. I think that does come back to economics. Of course it does.
Yeah, the other thing that strikes me about Northern Ireland and spending some time there is they cleave to the idea of being part of the United Kingdom, part of Westminster, part of the Crown, and they believe in an England and a Britain that kind of was 50 years ago. that doesn't exist anymore. And they sort of, desperate to be part of the UK and can't bear the idea of a united Ireland, but feeling simultaneously utterly disillusioned with Westminster and the politics that's coming from there that isn't improving their lives.
Yeah, it's a complicated.
It's a
complicated
really
place to be.
complicated picture.
Look, what is certainly true is that Northern Ireland politics has been deeply destabilised over the last 10 years, and the loyalist place, the unionist place within Northern Ireland has itself, partly its own hand by the actions of the DUP in the Brexit process, been deeply destabilised. So there is definitely a sense of existential angst about Northern Ireland's place from a unionist point of view in the union, which is doubtless feeding through to all sorts of instabilities. I doubt whether that's certainly an active conscious element of this, but it's certainly part of the background.
Jamie Oliver's Jamie's Dyslexia Revolution aired on Channel 4 on Monday night. And it ends with you raising questions about what's the government going to do about it. And we're going to come to that in a moment because the government is here in the shape of the Education Secretary, Bridget Phillipson, and so too is Jamie Oliver. Before we get to that, Jamie, I thought it was a revelatory documentary in so many ways and very personal to you. And if I could start, you only got your diagnosis of being dyslexic very recently.
Yeah, for the documentary. I mean, I've been kind of told I was throughout sort of my later education, but more sort of hearsay. But it wasn't really propped up with anything sort of, I guess, like a proper analysis of me and my brain and how it thinks. It was just sort of a one-liner given, but it never came with, say, extra time in my exams. I was pulled out of class and went to special needs as a student, but I didn't have any of the strategies that exist today. And I guess I thought I knew what I was going into when I did the documentary. I knew that there was a need to talk about dyslexia and neurodiversity in schools, but I didn't think it would be quite as big as this.
You talked about getting pulled out and going into special needs, and you wonder whether that's an assistance or an insult.
I mean, if I quoted things that happened, you wouldn't believe. I mean, part of the way that they used to try and fix us was to make you read 2 paragraphs of Shakespeare to a full assembly with 800 boys. Can you imagine? That'll fix them, kind of. And it was only like not that long ago. I'm not that old. But I think even being, knock on the door, can we have Jamie for special needs, please? I mean, I don't think it's great for self-esteem.
Not great for self-esteem. How did other kids treat you?
When you're pulled out for that, it's obviously, it comes down to the individual. I would say I was quite well and robust because I grew up in a pub and I was a people person, but for other people in the class, they were sort of shells of themselves and they wouldn't like it at all. So I think they were affected more. But they used to sort of sing special needs to let it be, special needs, special needs. Like, I'm not making it up. It sounds like I am, but I think the problem with special needs, which then became SEN, special educational needs, it more importantly, in my opinion, subliminally builds a child at primary school that thinks that they're less than and not as good as, and instead of building up a child's self-esteem to become the person that they're due to become, it diminishes them. And I think that's probably the most damaging part. You have a system that really is set up for sameness for 75% of the customers. So you've got essentially a quarter of the customers going into school that don't, the things they're being asked to be measured on and the way they're being measured don't work with their brains. So, our brains are as different as our fingerprints. And it's really important. I mean, it's important to keep telling parents and to your listeners that your child, is the way nature intended. The system might not be able to recognise that they're bright and brilliant and getting pats on the back in various forms, whether they're exam results or this, that and the other. But, your nature wanted to have diversity in thinkers and problem solvers. And I just think it's primary school where the child is diminished. And I think that's really dangerous. And I think there's a lot of parents I know there's a lot of parents out there feeling the pain of fighting the battles for their child and just hitting walls. And I think it's very divisive when it comes to who can afford to get extra help and who can't.
So let's bring in Bridget Phillipson now. Let me start by asking you this, Bridget. When your private office came and said to you, Jamie Oliver wants to come and see you, did you think, oh, fantastic, or holy crap, what a bloody nightmare?
Bit of both at the same time. Obviously, the profile that Jamie's been able to give to the issue and the impact and the reach that Jamie has, I think, has really shone a light on a big challenge within the system, and something that I'm committed to addressing, because whether it's dyslexia, neurodivergence, other ranges of children who have additional needs, we're not getting it right in terms of the outcomes for those children are just not good enough. They're not getting the support that they need at an early stage. And I've met too many families, as you just described there, Jamie, who've had to really battle and struggle in order to get the support that should be their child's right. And that is really hard. I think what you will see hopefully through the spending review just yesterday, with our announcement that we'll be launching a schools white paper in the autumn, which will have a big focus as part of that around SEND, is a government that is really determined to make sure that we deliver better life chances and improvements across the system, with more funding alongside that to make reform happen. Because my fundamental view is that we need all of our schools to be better at supporting with children with a much wider range of need. What I hear as well from teachers, from staff, is that they don't always feel that they've got what it takes in terms of training and support to make that a reality, despite their best efforts. And what that ultimately means is that children lose out, and the difference in terms of educational outcomes for some groups of children is something that through the white paper we want to really set out in some detail, but that also set out a plan behind it, a really clear and detailed plan about how we as a government are going to tackle that and make improvements happen.
So, Jamie, at the end of the documentary, it feels to me there are two specific asks that you want to see done. One is screening of pupils, and the other is teacher training. Just spell out kind of what needs to happen in your view.
I mean, I think there's a medley of things that could make classrooms more inclusive and the future of Britain more optimistic. But I think the obvious things are the teachers at large want to be trained in the latest of science and how the brain works and how that translates into a really well-run, inclusive class that's interactive and engaging. So obviously that is new teachers coming into the system. We want the new blood coming in, but also there's a lot of talent out there that never received enough training. So that's obviously the training's one issue, but then you need to know who's the customer, who are the kids that need help, and what flavour of, because as much as we like to pigeonhole names, the future will be a place where we don't really have names up front, because we'll all just be a flavour, including the neurotypical people, because we can't forget them as well, right? Even they're different flavours, but they happen to fit into the current schooling kind of measurement profile. So I just think we need to know who the kids are. We need to know who needs help. And then Bridget and her team can, of course, deploy relevant help to arm the assets. I mean, it sounds like a war, but I guess maybe I'm dramatising something that I feel deeply serious about. I do think it is at the front line of how we make Britain thrive again.
I mean, I hear white paper and I sometimes think long grass. Is that unfair?
I think, I do think it's unfair, because we haven't, as a country, had a serious look at the school system for a long time. So this is our opportunity as a government to really listen to those who are campaigning, to parents, to people working across education, to make sure that the whole system is in a much better place for all children. Because my observation about the current school system is that it serves some children well, but it's not serving quite big groups of children particularly well. Now, that applies to children with SEND. I would also say it extends to children who perhaps come from less well-off backgrounds, and we're seeing kind of emerging evidence about some of those gaps that are really opening up, and we have to tackle them, because I believe excellence should be for all of our children, and right now that isn't the reality. And I think when Jamie talks about the importance of identification of need, it's about how we get to a system that is just much better at identifying that more quickly, and how we identify where children need support. So just to give briefly one example of where I've seen that work really well. At the minute, the department's funding a programme around neurodiversity in schools, and I visited one of the schools taking part in the programme.
And I met with the staff who are doing it. So that has involved big upskilling for the team involved so that they're much better prepared and better equipped. But also I met with some of the parents at the end of that visit too. And their children, before this had been ruled out, their children weren't regularly attending school. They were in infants in primary school, but they weren't regularly there. And the confidence of the parents, because of the work that had been done between the parent and the teacher. And I think the parent-teacher relationship was really important as well, because what the parents were telling me was, and their children were autistic, was that they were kind of the experts in how to support their children in the home environment. What they couldn't do was align what was going on at home with what was going on at school. And actually the teacher said at the end of this process, they felt it had been a transformation. And actually it was good for all children in their class. It was good for those children who needed that additional support. But the evidence is also really clear that if you get it right for less well-off children, if you get it right for children with SEND, you get it right for every child.
Let me just ask a couple of specifics on this, because in the generalities, obviously everyone's very supportive and saying all the right things. The IFS says that the school settlement announced yesterday is effectively a budget freeze once free schools have been included. So where is the money going to come from? Let's talk hard tax here. Where is the money going to come from that is going to pay for the upskilling of these teachers? Because it's not just a question of new teachers coming into the profession. You've got to train all those who are currently teachers who may have had just a couple of hours in the whole of their teacher training on this issue. And where are you going to pay for screening?
Sure. So first on the money and then on the teacher training. On the money, I think it's a good settlement we've managed to secure in quite a tough environment for schools, but it is tight. I do have to be upfront about that. We are going to have to work with schools to make this really, really work as part of a bigger reform programme. But I think it is a really good settlement in the wider context. And I would say that, the expansion of free school meals eligibility to all children on universal credit will make a big difference in educational terms as well as an anti-poverty measure. And that's why schools really welcome it, because children arriving hungry and child poverty does materially impact their outcomes and their life chances, and actually the ability of staff to do their job where they're having to do so much more beyond their core business of teaching. On teacher training and development, from this September, we're making sure that the teacher training framework has much more on SEND in it than has been the case before. So that's the new teachers who are coming through. We're also updating the leadership qualifications that we have, because we need school leaders to really be on top of all of this, not just our teachers in the classroom, but school leaders. And leadership is obviously critical in how schools operate and, in every environment, but we know that in schools. And where it comes to the kind of teacher training and development of those in the profession, absolutely that is critical. I would also add in support staff who've got a really important role to play too, as well as our teachers. So in the white paper this autumn, that's where we'll set out the direction around funding, further funding reform we will want to make to tilt the system, but also around training, development, everything will be in that. And that will be through consultation. And in the run up to that, we're listening to people about what they think should be in it, but the white paper will allow us to consult as well.
Jamie, what do you think? I mean, do you buy what you're hearing, or do you think, let's see, the proof is in the pudding?
No, I mean, I think in the documentary you saw one of the young teachers saying, look, I did 3 years teacher training and I got half a day of training, which was about 4 hours. So 4 hours essentially to learn about what represents 25% of the class. So if dyslexia is sort of 10 to 15% of your average class, if you put in all the other neurodiversities, we're talking about 25%. So clearly that was obvious that it, as Bridget says, it wasn't enough. So there's a lot of work to be done. And also, there's a lot of strategies that need to be contextualised to how do you make that work in the actual classroom. I think it's brilliant. I mean, I think to have a commitment for that so quickly is amazing, but there's a lot of teachers out there, and how we reach the current teachers, and also do it in such a way where they're empowered but also resourced. And I think it's so funny because I ran away from school because I hated words and I hated what it represented, because I had nothing to offer it, and it was a big fingers up to it as I ran off to cooking, and it's taken me sort of 25 years to realise that school is just this incredible place which we all invest in. We all own a part of it, and teachers are at the forefront of that. I honestly, I've never had more respect for teachers, and when I started school dinners 20 years ago with Charles Clark, I think the tricky bit is and it's a challenge for Bridget, is like, how do you display great leadership when often historically you're like ships that pass in the night. So I know Bridget's obviously, you know, new to the job, and she's been amazing, and she's been very upfront to get involved in my filming. She didn't have to do that. She's turned up today. That's amazing. I mean, we want a minister that's willing to fight for the kids.
How
and
many
fight for us.
education secretaries have there been?
18.
18 since you did the school dinners?
Last time I counted. But they, I mean, you know, and they stay for sometimes as little as a year. So, I mean, it's a tricky one, isn't it? Because I think there is a short-termism about politics, which I'm sure is part of your daily life, isn't it? And I've had to watch it from afar and learn it from afar. But
there are rumours of going around about her now that she's going to be reshuffled and that the new job for Bridget Phillipson or whatever. What do you think about it?
Well, I can't speak on behalf of.
I think there's always Westminster gossip, and I think all of us do pretty well just to ignore that. Look, these are always matters for the Prime Minister. It's for the Prime Minister to determine who he wants to be doing particular jobs. All I can say to you now is being Education Secretary is the best job in government. And I'm really passionate about this job, about the opportunity that we have as a government to really shape not just this agenda, but life chances for children across our country. And, you know, you ask about what a white paper means. What a white paper means is a profound change in how we do things as a country and how we make sure that our system better supports a much wider range of children. That's a once-in-a-generation opportunity. Those kinds of opportunities don't come around very often. So I'm acutely aware of the responsibility that I have to get that right. And this is quite big change that we're talking about, and I know for some parents that can be a worry.
I feel like I've opened up a can that I knew it was big, but it's it's hundreds of % bigger than I thought it was.
So do you stay with it? Do you stay with it?
I have these campaigns. I do have a long tail. So I've been on school dinners for 20 years.
And just to say what I'd kind of invite you to do would be to be involved in the process of what we're doing now through the white paper, to be involved in the work that we're doing to help us to shape that. You've obviously got to reach, you know, for a lot of parents who've got experience of the system. So that, I suppose, would be my invitation to you.
What I learned in school.
Do you accept the invitation?
100%. I'm all in. Anything. This is, you know, I feel it's my duty to represent the many voices I hear. Like in my job, it ain't a normal job. My life is not a normal life. I have an unusual life. I am very accessible on many levels, and the pain, sincerely, of parents about either themselves as a younger child, even if they've done well and achieved a lot. Honestly, the visceral pain that I felt from grown adults about what this uninclusiveness about, because this is not a new problem. This is 100 years old. This problem, you know, in a way, like the structure that we put in place, because structures have, you know, some measurable positives. We've always measured kids in it. This 25% of kids have always been ignored. You know, my mum was talking to her window cleaner the other day, and he's like 65 years old and started to cry because he got bullied so much and the pain he felt. And, you know, but I did all right. You know, I kind of started my own business. And it's like these battered adults, but also adults that are fighting for their kids and feel very vulnerable. And I think it's a heaviness. It's almost like, and I know it feels dark and sad, but on an upside, I feel that these simple changes, whether they're cash neutral changes, whether they're symbolic changes, like taking the S out of send, because 25% of your customers ain't special. That's 1 in 4 of your customers, right? So like educational needs. And by the way, the same philosophies and strategies used to look after that 25% can be used to give the other 75% a more robust, individualised education. So we're talking about Little Britain thriving more in a time and an era that is going to be different to the last 2-3 decades around innovation. Like if you want, I work in education in Silicon Valley, have done for many, many years. If you knew what went into the only unique part of tech, because all of the attributes of tech are just skills from old industries, marketing, PR, operations. The only unique part is neurodiverse coders, right? And there's deep plans about how you look, and it's often hereditary. So there's deep plans 20 years old about how you engage the parents of current coders to make sure there's enough coders of tomorrow. So like all I'm trying to say is we're going into there's a lot of chat yesterday about investment in tech, where is Britain in tech? There's 150,000 positions for people in tech that are open now. It's like then most of them are going to come from neurodiverse part of the classroom that needs to be elevated and given self-respect.
Jamie, there was something you said about you feel the visceral pain of the parents you've spoken to. Do you still have that visceral pain inside yourself of what you've been through, of how it's defined you, of the person you've become?
Look, this documentary and this campaign wasn't created. Like, I'm a robust kid from a pub that did all right and kind of made my own way and solved my own problems. Like, I'm one of the ones that got away. And as you probably know, with dyslexia, it does over-index in things like entrepreneurs, creative arts, architects and things like that. Like, I was one of those. But I did an interview about a kid's book I wrote, and I just said it was one of the hardest things I ever did. And I'd finally brushed off the chips off my shoulder from school and dyslexia and special needs, and I kind of broke down live on TV. So clearly, that is a shock to me. That, if you ever saw that footage, is I got quite upset, and I don't know where it came from, but it was.
Still.
But I just think. And it's really weird. Look, I think it's just a 6, 7, 8-year-old kid. So I'm not the one to feel sorry for, because I did all right, okay? So I'm the one that escaped. Where the hell did that come from? So if you amplify that, which clearly isn't fake, because if I could act that, I'd be in bloody Hollywood, wouldn't I? There is a heaviness in this country. It's 25% of kids. We're talking about 130,000 kids a year. We're pumping out 600,000 kids every year out of education. About 150,000 of those are going to have some form of that inside of them. And they're going to go into be young adults, and they're going to be young parents. They're going to be fighting for their kids. They're over-indexing in mental health problems, suicide, higher cost to the NHS, 55% in prisons, right? It's not genetic. They're not born to be in prison. But I swear to you, if you peel it back to the primary school, where our job civically, as state, as Secretary of State for Education, as parent, as teacher, is to take this little child and find a way to give them a sense of place and value. That is our job. And we've opened a tin because there's a lot more upset parents than me. And it's deep. It's deep. And I don't want anyone to feel sorry for me, because there's nothing to feel sorry for, because I found a way. Lots don't find a way. And by the way, like, because we over-index, well, because we earn less money on average if you're dyslexic or neurodiverse. And we don't have as good an educational attainment and all the kind of life chances that come off of that. If you go to a really poor council estate, we're going to over-index there like the prisons, right? But we don't have to be there. We don't have to be. It's not meant to be. It's not in, it's what, I mean, that's why I go back to, like, your child's brain is as different as your fingerprint. Nature's intention is diversity. Our streets, our communities, our countries needs different opinions. We need to have neurodiversity represented in Parliament, because it can't be fair otherwise. It needs to be represented in our councils. Otherwise, you have people like Essex County Council that just decide, who gave them the right, I do not understand, to say we don't believe in dyslexia, which means they can go, la, 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 don't have to pay for it, don't have got no responsibility, la, 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 la. That's my county where I come from. And by the way, Essex is well employed, low unemployment, they got a few quid. I just don't understand. I mean, we spoke about it last time.
Yeah, what have you found? I mean, just for kind of clarification, we took part in a panel discussion last week about this, and Jamie raised it. Have you found out anything about that?
So I've asked officials to go away and provide me with some more information on this. So I've not had the report back yet, but I've asked them to give me a full update on what's going on, because, every child, no matter where they are in the country, should be getting the support that they need.
And do you worry? I mean, I hate using that phrase, postcode lottery, but if the Education Secretary says, right, this is something we are doing for all our schools, can your RIT run, or will it be up to local councils to say, no, you know what, don't really believe in this neurodiversity
It is
thing.
a postcode lottery. That's the
It
reality.
is.
That's a fact.
Yeah, I mean, there are clearly differences across the country, but what I would say is that this is something that we have to respond to everywhere. I was going to say a challenge, and I slightly hesitate actually because it's not a challenge. It's something that I think we need to embrace because, I think there is, whilst what I'm about to say will sound quite difficult for some parents given what they've had to go through by way of struggle, this is something that we should celebrate in terms of the diversity of what our young people bring, not just what they bring into school, but also then where that takes them right throughout their lives in terms of their creativity, what they can offer to the world and who they are as people. And I think the central part of what we need to think about where it comes to support for children in school is not just what that means for their time at school, because that ends, they leave school. It's how we prepare our young people for adult life. And that's why, for me, that some of the kind of guiding principles about the change that we want to make are how do we ensure that our schools are more inclusive so they better meet the needs of all children? But alongside that, how, including within mainstream schools, do we have more specialist support for children who need it? Now, that's not something we're waiting to do, with the reform in the white paper. We've got money to do it. We're driving that forward already, both in terms of some of the places, but also the training for staff. But I would also add that for children whose needs are more complex, where they need more specialist support, we do have to make sure the places are there for them. And that's where there is often quite big gaps across the country, but also where I think some of the brilliant people who work in the specialist sector have got a lot to offer mainstream schools as well.
Jamie, just finally, you kind of said you've opened this tin and you've looked inside the tin and it's way, way bigger than you possibly could have imagined when you opened it. Are you pleased you've opened it?
Yeah, I'm pleased I opened it. I think one of the things I'm pleased about is I feel that there was, like, a lot of adults feel that they've been masking for many years. They've been getting on and getting by and felt a lot of shame. And so I think, like, it's good to normalise talking about our differences. But I think when we normalise it, we also understand that different thinkers offer a wider conversation and more interrogation and more collaboration and the capacity for better ideas and landing better, more exciting businesses or departments of government or this, that or the other. But I do think that possibly with AI and possibly with this conversation getting bigger and bigger, because I don't think the public are going to let this one go. I think now the genie's out of the bottle. It will grow into a beautiful thing that will, because also having more diverse classrooms is not a luxury, it's a necessity. And my guess of the attitude towards Essex County Council of ignoring that dyslexia exists, which is obviously there'll be other isms around neurodiversity, is that they don't like the fact that there's a Human Rights Act 2021 that says that a child in a family has the legal right to the help to normalise their school experience. They don't want to face that reality. They would rather be taken to court. And actually what we're seeing around the country is most of the parents that take councils to court win, but most don't take them to court because, of course, the ones that are skewed the most are poor, and poor people can't take people to court because they're not that confident. That I'm generalising, but so I think, Essex don't have a right to reinvent science because whatever next. I think that will be dealt with. We either have to believe in neuroscience and or we don't. But I don't think that, and I think if the government wants to take a stand, that's one thing. A local council, interesting. But again, I think even looking at education as a ministry and a local affair, I mean, in my head, my dyslexic mind, I think that this is a kind of I feel education maybe needs to be reframed in a kind of what's the correct term? A sort of structural. It's more. It needs to be reframed in more of a kind of not a local service or a ministry. It feels like a structural service. It's preparing our kids for an economy that's hopefully going to thrive. I feel more like the NHS or more like energy or transport systems. What does that mean? It means that when you look at things that are normally invested in that way, it's normally a 10 to 25 year cycle. And the tricky bit that I've had since school dinners is you're always going in a bit of a 3-year loop, so there has always been like a short-termism. I mean, when we did school dinners, like we didn't just want to we wanted more money on the plate. We wanted more training. We wanted a pot of cash for if you needed to get tables and chairs. Like, do you know what I mean? So like, along with training and along with more enthusiasm from government, you do need ring-fenced, hypothecated cash for good cause. So, I'm still on the school dinners journey because, yes, of course they've improved. And
now you're on the dyslexia journey
well,
as well.
yeah, but we haven't stopped one. Like, on school dinners is a long way. It's 23,000 schools. It's the biggest restaurant group in the country. There's still no national procurement. We could do it much better, much more efficient. I mean, anyway, I'm not going to go off into that one. But the point is like, it's a big system. It's a huge system, and we need to make it an inclusive one. But yeah.
Well, good luck on the journey. Jamie, thanks so much for coming in.
Thank
Bridget
you.
Phillipson as well. Both of you, thanks very much indeed. Lewis, I can't wait to hear the interview you've got tomorrow.
Yeah, we've. Have you ever been so exhausted you've just resigned from your job, John?
Yeah,
Well, it is Thursday after all. Are you in next week?
Every Wednesday.
Every Wednesday I resign.
Well, we're speaking to a man who, when we recorded an interview with him yesterday, asked us to believe that the reason that he resigned last week as Reform chairman is because he was a bit knackered. Zia Youssef. He came into the newsagent studio to try and provide a bit of explanation as to how it could be that you could be so exhausted you resign from your job on the Friday and you're back in on a Monday.
After a good night's sleep.
After a few good nights'
I
sleep,
quite respect
obviously.
that, I have to say.
Yeah, it's very you, actually. I can see you.
Lose it, have a nice sleep,
And
maybe
then
take
back.
aperitifs, and then back in it.
He is an interesting character, that is for sure.
Well, look forward to hearing that tomorrow on The Newsagents. Until then, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye for now.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.